patient confidentiality breach in room 314. The notification popped up on my screen at 2:47 a.m., piercing through my exhaustion like a scalpel through skin. I blinked hard, trying to focus on the computer monitor in the dimly lit records department of Cincinnati General Hospital. My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a medical resident in one of Ohio's busiest hospitals. What I discovered that night would shatter everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and the lengths people will go to survive. I'd been pulling another 18-hour shift, the kind that makes your bones ache and your vision blur around the edges. The records department was my refuge during these long nights, a quiet sanctuary where I could catch up on administrative work while the rest of the hospital hummed with controlled chaos. The breach notification was routine. We got them occasionally when staff accidentally accessed the wrong patient files, but something about this one made my stomach clench. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Room 314. That had been my room 6 months ago, after the car accident that nearly killed me. A drunk driver had T-boned my Honda Civic on I-75 during a thunderstorm. I'd spent 3 days in a medically induced coma while my brain swelling subsided, followed by 2 weeks of recovery. The whole experience was a blur of pain medication and worried faces, but I remembered room 314. I remembered the view of the parking lot, the way the afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, the steady beep of machines that had become my temporary lullaby. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked on the notification details. The breach had occurred during my hospitalization, but it was only now showing up in the system due to a software update that flagged historical irregularities. Someone had accessed my medical records multiple times during visiting hours. Not my attending physician, not the nursing staff, but someone with visitor-level access who had somehow gained entry to restricted information. The specific data accessed made my blood run cold. Blood type: O negative, universal donor, tissue compatibility markers, organ health assessments from my post-accident scans, surgical history, recovery prognosis. This wasn't someone looking for basic medical information. This was someone mapping my body like a parts catalog. I printed the access logs with shaking fingers, the laser printer's mechanical whir sounding unnaturally loud in the silent office. The timestamps showed a pattern: 2:15 p.m., 2:18 p.m., 2:23 p.m. on March 15th, then again on March 16th at 1:45 p.m., 1:52 p.m. Someone had spent considerable time in my room, repeatedly accessing information they had no right to see. Growing up without parents who cared enough to stay had taught me to be self-reliant, but it had also left me with abandonment issues that ran deeper than Ohio's winter frost. The idea that someone had violated my most personal information while I lay unconscious and vulnerable triggered every fear I'd spent years trying to suppress. My professional training kicked in, that analytical part of my brain that had carried me through medical school and residency. But underneath that clinical detachment, panic was building like pressure in a steam pipe. I cross-referenced the access times with visitor logs, my fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The hospital's security system was thorough. Every entry and exit was recorded, every swipe of a visitor's badge tracked. What I found made me lean back in my chair, a cold realization washing over me like ice water. The security footage from those dates would be archived, but I didn't have clearance to access it. The visitor logs, however, told a story I wasn't prepared to read. During each of those suspicious access periods, only one non-medical person had been in my room. Someone who had signed in as family, someone who had every legal right to visit me while I lay unconscious and defenseless. The name on the visitor logs stared back at me from the screen. Carmen Rodriguez. My mother. Carmen Rodriguez, who abandoned me when I was 8 years old to chase her next high. Carmen Rodriguez, who missed my high school graduation, my college graduation, my medical school graduation. Carmen Rodriguez, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, not since the last time she'd shown up at Grandma Ruth's house asking for money to pay off drug dealers who were threatening to break her legs. My mother, who I had assumed didn't even know where I worked, had somehow found out about my accident. She'd visited me multiple times while I was unconscious, and during those visits, she'd accessed medical information that someone could use to what? Sell to the highest bidder? Find potential organ recipients who could afford to pay premium prices for healthy tissue from a young doctor? The thought was so horrific, so unthinkable, that my mind rejected it at first. Mothers don't sell their children's organs. Even absent, drug-addicted mothers had limits. But as I sat in that sterile office, surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment and the distant sounds of nurses making their rounds, I forced myself to confront the possibility. Carmen had been desperate for years. Drug addiction was expensive, and her lifestyle had burned every bridge she'd ever built. She'd stolen from Grandma Ruth, pawned family heirlooms, and manipulated anyone willing to help her. But this would be a new low, even for her. I gathered the printed logs and slipped them into my bag, my mind already racing ahead to what I needed to do next. The hospital's IT security team would need to be notified, but I wanted to understand the full scope of what had happened before I turned this into an official investigation. If my suspicions were correct, Carmen hadn't just violated my privacy, she'd potentially put my life in danger. The walk to my car felt different that night. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound suspicious. The parking lot that I'd navigated thousands of times suddenly felt exposed and dangerous. As I unlocked my Honda, the replacement for the one destroyed in the accident, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Someone who knew exactly how healthy my organs were, exactly what they might be worth to the right buyer. Someone who had given birth to me 28 years ago and apparently had no qualms about turning that biological connection into a commodity. The next morning brought Detective Ryan Cross into my life like a thunderclap on a clear day. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a sad excuse for a turkey sandwich while reviewing the access logs for the 100th time, when a man in a dark suit approached my table. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of steady presence that made you feel safer just by being near him. Dr. Brooks? His voice was warm but professional, tinged with the slight authority of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions. "I'm Detective Ryan Cross, FBI. I'd like to speak with you about some irregularities in medical record access here at Cincinnati General." My heart rate spiked, but years of medical training had taught me to maintain composure under pressure. "What kind of irregularities?" Ryan gestured to the empty chair across from me. "May I?" I nodded, studying his face as he sat down. He had kind eyes, the sort that had seen too much, but hadn't lost their capacity for empathy. There was something about him that reminded me of Grandma Ruth, a sense of reliability that I'd learned not to trust too quickly. "We're investigating a medical identity theft ring that's been operating in several hospitals across Ohio. The perpetrators target patients with specific medical profiles: young, healthy individuals with optimal organ function and rare blood types. They gain access to medical records through various means, then sell that information to underground networks." My mouth dried. "Underground networks?" "Organ trafficking," Ryan said quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. "There's a growing market for healthy organs, and unfortunately, some very desperate people are willing to do anything to meet that demand. The information they steal can be used to identify potential donors, who might be approached under various pretexts." The turkey sandwich felt like cardboard in my mouth. I set it down, my appetite completely gone. What kind of pretexts? Fake medical emergencies, phony research studies. Sometimes they pose as legitimate organ donation coordinators. Ryan leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Brooks, we have reason to believe your medical records may have been compromised during your hospitalization 6 months ago." I pulled the printed access logs from my bag with hands that weren't quite steady. "I discovered this last night," I said, sliding the papers across the table. "Someone accessed my records multiple times during visiting hours while I was unconscious." Ryan's expression darkened as he scanned the documents. "This is exactly the pattern we've been tracking. Dr. Brooks, you fit the victim profile perfectly. 28 years old, O-negative blood type, excellent health markers, no significant medical history prior to the accident." He looked up at me. "Have you been contacted by anyone claiming to need organ donation? Any suspicious calls or visits?" "No, but..." I hesitated, then decided to trust this man who seemed to materialize just when I needed answers. "The visitor who accessed my records? It's my mother. We're estranged. I haven't spoken to her in 3 years." Ryan's pen stopped moving across his notebook. "Your mother?" "Carmen Rodriguez. She's had addiction issues for most of my life. She's disappeared for months at a time, shown up asking for money, stolen from family members." The words felt like confessions, each one a small betrayal of the woman who had given birth to me. But I never thought she'd... I mean, this is different. This is criminal, Ryan finished gently. "Dr. Brooks, I know this is difficult, but I need you to understand something. The people we're tracking don't just steal information, they act on it. If your mother provided your medical details to the wrong people, you could be in serious danger." The cafeteria noise, conversations, clinking dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine seemed to fade into background static. What kind of danger? Forced organ harvesting isn't unheard of. These networks have been known to orchestrate accidents or medical emergencies to put healthy individuals in positions where their organs become available. Ryan's voice was steady, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "I'm not trying to scare you, but you need to be aware of the risks." Fear twisted in my stomach, but alongside it was something else. Anger. Pure, clean anger at the woman who had failed me in every way that mattered and was apparently finding new ways to betray me. "What do you need from me?" "Cooperation. We need to monitor your activities, make sure you're safe while we investigate the network, and we need to find your mother." "I haven't seen Carmen in years. I don't know where she lives, where she works, assuming she works. The last address I had was a motel on the west side, but that was 3 years ago."
Ryan nodded, making notes. "We'll find her. What I need from you is a promise that you'll be careful. No walking alone in parking lots, no going to unfamiliar places by yourself. Is there someone who can stay with you? Family? A boyfriend?" I almost laughed, but it came out as more of a bitter sound. "My grandmother, Ruth Brooks. She raised me after Carmen left. And there's my cousin Emily, but she lives in Chicago." The boyfriend question stung a little. My dedication to medical training hadn't left much time for relationships. "No boyfriend." "Grandmother it is then. I'll need her contact information." Ryan paused, studying my face. "Dr. Brooks, Hannah, I want you to know that we're going to find the people responsible for this, your mother included." Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. "You sound like this is personal." Ryan was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against his notebook. "I used to be an EMT before I joined the FBI. I've seen what these trafficking networks do to people, how they exploit desperation and destroy families. When I switched to law enforcement, I specialized in medical crimes because..." He trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. "Because someone has to protect people who can't protect themselves. And you think I can't protect myself?" "I think you're brilliant and capable and probably tougher than most people give you credit for," Ryan said, and something warm unfurled in my chest at his words. "But I also think you're in a situation where being smart and tough might not be enough. These people are professionals and they have resources." I looked down at the access logs, at the timestamps that marked each violation of my privacy. "So what happens now?" "Now we investigate. I'll coordinate with hospital security to get the surveillance footage from your room during those dates. We'll track down your mother and find out what she knows. And you..." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "You call me if anything seems off, anything at all. Wrong number calls, strangers asking questions, people following you. Your instincts are probably better than you realize. Trust them. I took the card, noting the way his fingers brushed mine for just a moment. And if we find her, if we find Carmen, then we'll get answers. And we'll make sure this never happens to anyone else. As he gathered his things to leave, Ryan paused and looked back at me. Hannah, I know this is overwhelming, but you're not alone in this anymore. We're going to figure it out. After he left, I sat in the cafeteria for a long time, turning his business card over in my fingers. For the first time in years, someone was offering to help me. Not because they had to, not because they felt obligated by family ties, but because it was the right thing to do. It was a foreign feeling, but not an unwelcome one.
Great-grandfather. Family photos lined every surface. Me at various stages of childhood, Emily in her law school graduation cap, Ruth and Grandpa Joe on their wedding day 53 years ago. What those photos didn't show, what had always been carefully edited out of our family narrative, was Carmen. But as I sat across from Ruth that evening, watching her weathered hands shake slightly as she poured tea from her favorite china set, I realized that Carmen's absence from our photo galleries didn't mean she'd been absent from our lives. She'd been there all along, lurking in the shadows, a ghost we'd all pretended we couldn't see. You found something, didn't you? Ruth said, without looking up from the teapot. At 74, my grandmother had the kind of intuition that came from decades of teaching high school students. She could sense trouble before it walked through the door. I pulled out the access logs and Ryan's business card, spreading them on the coffee table between us like evidence in a trial. Carmen was at the hospital while I was unconscious. She accessed my medical records. The FBI thinks she might have sold the information to organ traffickers. Ruth's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at the papers as if they were written in a language she didn't want to learn. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was wondering when this would happen. What do you mean when this would happen? Ruth stood up slowly, her arthritis making the movement careful and deliberate. She walked to the old secretary desk in the corner, the one where she'd helped me with homework for 10 years, and pulled out a small wooden box I'd never seen before. When she returned to the couch, her expression was grim. Carmen's been calling me, she said, opening the box to reveal a collection of torn envelopes and crumpled papers. Not often, maybe every few months, but she's been asking questions about you. Where you work, how you're doing, whether you've been sick or injured. I stared at the box, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. For how long? 2 years, maybe more. Ruth pulled out one of the letters, her fingers tracing the shaky handwriting. I thought she was finally getting clean, trying to make amends. She said she wanted to be part of your life again, that she was proud of what you'd accomplished. Ruth's laugh was bitter. I was foolish enough to believe her. You gave her information about me? Just basics. That you were doing well, that you'd become a doctor. I never told her where you worked specifically, but... Ruth's face crumpled. Hannah, I'm so sorry. I thought she was trying to change. I reached for one of the letters, my hands trembling as I unfolded the wrinkled paper. Carmen's handwriting was erratic, the letters slanting in different directions as if she'd been writing under stress or influence. Ruth, I know I don't deserve to ask, but I need to know if Hannah's okay. I heard there was an accident. Please tell me she's all right. I know I have no right to care, but she's still my daughter. I've been clean for 6 months now. I want to make things right. The letter was dated 4 days after my car accident. How did she know about the accident? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Ruth pulled out another letter, this one more recent. She said she had friends at the hospital, people who kept her informed about things happening in the city. I felt sick. Carmen hadn't stumbled across information about my accident. She'd been monitoring me somehow, keeping tabs on my life through a network of contacts I'd never known existed. The violation felt complete now, not just of my medical records, but of every assumption I'd made about my privacy and safety. "There's more," Ruth said quietly. She pulled out a photograph and my heart stopped. It was me, taken sometime in the last year outside the hospital. I was wearing my white coat, walking toward my car in the parking lot, completely unaware that someone was documenting my movements. On the back, in Carmen's handwriting, "She looks so grown up, so successful. I hope someday she can forgive me." "She's been watching me," I whispered. "I think so, yes." Ruth's voice was heavy with guilt and regret. "Hannah, I should have told you. I should have known she was up to something. But I kept hoping." "Hoping what? That the woman who abandoned me, who stole from us, who chose drugs over her own daughter for 20 years, had suddenly developed a conscience?" Ruth flinched at the harshness in my voice, but I couldn't stop the words from pouring out. They'd been building for years, waiting for the right catalyst to release them. "I kept hoping," Ruth said softly, "that she was still the little girl I raised, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were better than roses because they were free." I studied my grandmother's face, seeing the pain there, the weight of disappointment she'd been carrying. Ruth had raised Carmen too, had watched her descend into addiction and chaos, had probably blamed herself for every failure along the way. Now she was facing the possibility that the granddaughter she'd tried to save had become something truly monstrous. "We need to find her," I said, pulling out Ryan's business card. "The FBI agent who's investigating this, he needs to see these letters, the photograph, everything." Ruth nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Hannah, what if we find her and what if she's really done something unforgivable?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. What if Carmen had sold information that could have gotten me killed? What if my own mother had been willing to sacrifice my life for whatever money the trafficking network had offered? What if the woman who had given me life had become so desperate, so lost, that she'd crossed a line no parent should ever cross? "Then we'll deal with it," I said, though the words felt like stones in my mouth. "But we need to know the truth." Ruth gathered the letters and the photograph, placing them carefully back in the box. "I'll call your Detective Cross in the morning. He'll need to hear this from me." As I drove home that night, Carmen's photograph on the passenger seat beside me, I kept checking my rearview mirror for cars that might be following me. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every stranger potentially dangerous. But underneath the fear was something else, a cold, analytical fury that reminded me why I'd become a doctor in the first place. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to fix things: broken bones, damaged organs, failing systems. I'd learned to diagnose problems and create solutions, to stay calm under pressure and make life or death decisions with steady hands and a clear mind. But some things couldn't be fixed with medical training and determination. Some betrayals cut too deep for healing. Some damage was too extensive for repair. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I realized that in less than 24 hours, my entire world had shifted. The mother I'd written off as a lost cause had become an active threat. The career I'd built as a sanctuary had become a target. And the family I thought was safely distant had revealed itself to be dangerously close. Tomorrow, Ryan would begin the process of hunting down Carmen Rodriguez, and I would have to confront the possibility that the woman who had given me life had been willing to trade it away for the right price. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a resolve I hadn't felt since the day I'd decided to become a doctor. It was time to stop being the victim in my own story. Ryan had tried to talk me out of going to Carmen's apartment. "He let us handle this," he had said over the phone that morning. But protocols hadn't raised me when Carmen disappeared for months at a time. Protocols hadn't kissed my scraped knees or taught me to tie my shoes when my mother was too high to function. The address we'd traced from her recent letters led to Riverside Gardens, a name that was either deeply ironic or criminally misleading. The apartment complex squatted at the concrete toad beside the highway,
its parking lot cracked and weedy, its facade stained with years of neglect. This was where Carmen Rodriguez had ended up after 20 years of chasing her next fix. I knocked on apartment 2B with hands that weren't quite steady. The door opened on a chain, revealing a sliver of face I almost didn't recognize. Carmen had always been thin, but now she looked skeletal. Her cheekbones jutted from sunken cheeks, and her skin had a yellowish tinge that made my medical training sound alarm bells. "Hannah?" Her voice was raspy, uncertain. "My God, you look just like—" "Let me in, Carmen." She hesitated, then unlatched the chain. The apartment was sparse and surprisingly clean, but it reeked of medications and something else. The sweet, sick smell of liver failure that I'd learned to recognize during my rotations. Prescription bottles covered the kitchen counter like a pharmacy display. Lactulose, rifaximin, diuretics, all medications used to manage end-stage liver disease. "You're sick," I said, the words coming out more like an accusation than an observation. Carmen laughed, a bitter sound that dissolved into a coughing fit. "Always the doctor, aren't you? Just like your father." She moved carefully to the couch, her movements those of someone whose body was failing in fundamental ways. He was going to be a doctor too, you know, before he decided being a teenage father wasn't part of his life plan. "I'm not here to talk about him." "No, I suppose you're not." Carmen studied my face with eyes that were too bright, too yellow. "You found out about the hospital, didn't you?" The casual way she said it, as if violating my medical privacy was just another Tuesday activity, made anger flare in my chest. "You accessed my records while I was unconscious. You photographed me, followed me, sold information about my organs to criminals." "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Carmen's voice cracked. "I just needed money for treatments. The doctor said I had maybe 6 months without intervention. I contacted someone who said they could help, but they wanted information first, proof that I had access to healthy donors." "Healthy donors," I repeated, tasting bile. "You mean your daughter?" "I never intended for them to actually approach you." Carmen stood up too quickly, swaying slightly. "I thought if I could just get the initial payment, I could figure something else out, find another way to get the money for treatment." I pulled out my phone and showed her Ryan's number on the screen. "There's an FBI agent who wants to talk to you about a trafficking network, about how desperate mothers sell their children's medical information to the highest bidder." Carmen's face went white beneath the jaundice. "FBI?" "His name is Ryan Cross. He specializes in medical crimes. Apparently what you did, selling access to my organs, is a federal crime." I kept my voice level, clinical. "The network you contacted targets people like me, young, healthy, with universal donor blood types. They use the information to orchestrate accidents or medical emergencies to harvest organs." "I didn't know," Carmen whispered, sinking back onto the couch. "I swear to God, Hannah, I didn't know they would actually hurt you. I thought it was just information. Just information about my blood type, my tissue compatibility, my surgical history, my recovery patterns, just a complete roadmap of my body's value as spare parts." Carmen buried her face in her hands, and for a moment she looked like the woman I remembered from childhood. Broken, desperate, but still recognizably my mother. "I'm dying, Hannah. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe a month without intervention. I've been on waiting lists for 2 years, but my history, the drug use, I'm not considered a priority candidate." The medical details clicked into my mind like puzzle pieces. End-stage liver disease, probably cirrhosis from years of alcohol and drug abuse. The yellowish skin tone, the medications, the careful movements. Carmen was in liver failure, and time was running out. "So you decided to sell me instead." "I decided to try anything that might keep me alive long enough to make amends." Carmen looked up at me, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know I've been the worst mother imaginable. But I wanted a chance to tell you I'm sorry, to try to explain." "Explain what? How you chose drugs over your 8-year-old daughter? How you disappeared for months at a time while Grandma Ruth worked 3 jobs to keep me fed and clothed? How you stole from the only people who still cared about you? My voice was rising, 20 years of resentment pouring out. Or maybe you want to explain how you decided my organs were worth more than my life. Carmen started to respond, but her words were cut off by a violent coughing fit that brought up blood. She doubled over, gasping, and my medical training overrode my anger. I was beside her in seconds, checking her pulse, assessing her breathing. "When was your last doctor's appointment?" I demanded. 3 weeks ago. They said, another coughing fit, more blood. They said there wasn't much more they could do.
Carmen's pulse was rapid and thready, her breathing shallow. She was going into crisis, her liver finally giving up the fight it had been losing for years. As I reached for my phone to call 911, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Hannah, please, before the ambulance comes, I need you to know something." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The man I contacted, Vincent Blake, he said if the initial arrangement didn't work out, there were other options. Medical trials, experimental procedures. He said he could help me get a transplant even with my history, but it would cost more money." "What kind of other options?" "I don't know, but he's been calling me, asking for more information about you, your schedule, your routines, where you live." Carmen's grip tightened. I told him I changed my mind, that the deal was off, but he said it was too late, that they'd already invested resources in researching you. Cold fear washed over me. The trafficking network wasn't just buying information. They were actively targeting me. Carmen hadn't just violated my privacy, she'd painted a bullseye on my back. How do I contact him? "Hannah, no! You can't! These people are dangerous. They said if I tried to back out or contact the police..." Carmen's eyes rolled back and she collapsed against the couch unconscious. I called 911, my hands steady despite the panic coursing through my veins. As I performed basic life support, waiting for the paramedics to arrive, I realized that everything had just changed again. Carmen wasn't just a criminal who'd betrayed me. She was also a dying woman who might be my only connection to the people who were hunting me. And despite everything she'd done, despite 20 years of abandonment and betrayal, I couldn't let her die. Not when she might be the key to stopping Vincent Blake and his network from destroying other families the way they destroyed ours. The emergency department at Cincinnati General was controlled chaos when the ambulance arrived with Carmen. I rode alongside the paramedics, my medical resident badge getting me access that family relationships never could have provided. Dr. Elena Vasquez was waiting when we rolled through the doors, her expression grim as she took in Carmen's condition. "Talk to me, Hannah," Elena said, falling into step beside the gurney as we moved toward Trauma Bay 3. 52-year-old female, end-stage liver disease, probable cirrhosis. She's been on transplant waiting lists but isn't a priority candidate due to substance abuse history. I kept my voice clinical, professional, even as my personal world crumbled around me. Family history? The question hit me like a physical blow. She's my mother. Elena's hand stilled for just a moment. In 15 years of mentoring medical students and residents, she'd seen everything, but this was uncharted territory. "Hannah, you need to step back. Let us handle this. I'm her next of kin. I need to be here. You're also a resident at this hospital, which creates a conflict of interest." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "And from what Detective Cross told me earlier, there are other complications we need to consider." Ryan appeared at my elbow as if summoned by Elena's words. "Hannah, we need to talk." I watched Elena work, her skilled hands performing procedures I'd done hundreds of times myself. Carmen looked so small on the hospital bed, so fragile. The monitor showed what I already knew. Her liver was shutting down, taking the rest of her body with it. "I told him about Vincent Blake," I said to Ryan, without taking my eyes off the trauma bay. "He's been calling me, asking for my routines, my schedule. He said he told me it was too late to back out of their arrangement." Ryan's expression darkened. "We've been tracking Blake for 2 years. He runs one of the most sophisticated organ trafficking networks in the Midwest. If he's specifically targeting you, then I'm not safe anywhere." I finally turned to look at him. Carmen said he offered her other options, medical trials, experimental procedures.
Ways to get a transplant despite her history. Illegal transplants. Blake has connections with corrupt surgeons who will perform procedures off the books for the right price. He lowered his voice. Hannah, there's something else. We found Blake's operation earlier today. He had a file on you, photographs, medical records, even details about your apartment and your work schedule. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. How much detail? Everything. He knows where you live, what car you drive, what time you usually leave for work. His network has been planning something, and your mother's information was just the starting point. Elena emerged from the trauma bay, pulling off her gloves with the careful precision that meant difficult news was coming. Hannah, your mother is stable for now, but she's in end-stage liver failure. Without a transplant, she has days, maybe a week. What about the waiting list?
Given her substance abuse history and the advanced stage of her disease, she's not going to move up the list in time. Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. However, we ran preliminary blood work for transplant compatibility, and there's something you need to know. I already knew what she was going to say. The blood tests we'd run on me after the car accident had included full tissue typing. Carmen's desperate search through my medical records suddenly made horrible sense. I'm a match, I said. You're not just a match, Elena said quietly. You're a perfect match. Same blood type, compatible tissue markers, ideal size differential. From a medical standpoint, you're probably the best possible donor she could have. The irony was so complete it almost would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Carmen had sold information about my organs to criminals, and now those same organs were the only thing that could save her life. Living donor liver transplant, I said, my medical training kicking in automatically. Remove a portion of my liver, transplant it to her, my liver regenerates, hers starts functioning again. In theory, yes, but Hannah, you need to understand what this means. Elena sat down beside me in the waiting area, her voice dropping to the tone she used for delivering devastating diagnoses. This isn't just a medical decision. Your mother committed crimes that put you in danger. She violated your trust in the most fundamental way possible, and now she needs a piece of your body to survive. I stared through the window of the trauma bay where Carmen lay connected to machines that were keeping her alive. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking heartbeats and oxygen levels, and all the clinical measurements that reduced a human life to numbers on a screen. What are the risks? I asked. For you? Living donor liver surgery is major surgery, but with your age and health status, the risks are minimal. Full recovery in 6 to 8 weeks, and your liver function should return to normal within months. Elena paused. For her, the surgery could give her 10 to 15 more years of life, assuming she stays clean and follows the post-transplant protocols. Ryan leaned forward. Hannah, there's something else to consider. If Blake's network knows about your mother's condition, they might see this as an opportunity. Corrupt surgeons, off-the-books procedures, ways to circumvent the official transplant system. You think they'll try to force me into donating? I think they'll try whatever generates the most profit. Blake doesn't care about your mother's survival. He cares about the money he can make from your organs. Ryan's jaw tightened. We've seen cases where these networks orchestrate medical emergencies to create urgency around transplant decisions. Elena looked between Ryan and me, understanding dawning in her expression. You think Carmen's crisis tonight wasn't natural progression of her disease. I think Blake's network has been monitoring her condition, waiting for the right moment to create maximum pressure on Hannah. What better way to force a transplant decision than to make it seem like there are only days left to save her mother's life? I felt sick, not just from the magnitude of the decision I was facing, but from the possibility that even Carmen's medical emergency had been orchestrated by the people she had contacted. Every aspect of the situation had been manipulated, designed to back me into a corner where I only had one choice. I need to see her, I said. Elena started to protest, but I was already walking toward the trauma bay.
Carmen was awake, her yellow-tinged eyes tracking my movement as I approached her bed. "Hannah," she said, "I heard what the doctor said about the transplant. Did you know? When you sold my information to Blake, did you know we were compatible?" Carmen's face crumpled. "I suspected. Your father and I were both O-negative, and you had the same build, the same—" She stopped, unable to finish. "The same marketable organs. I never meant it to come to this. I swear to you, I thought I could find another way. But when Blake told me there were no other options, when he said the only way to get a transplant was through his network," Carmen reached toward me with a trembling hand. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry for all of it." I stared down at the woman who had given me life and then spent 20 years trying to destroy it. The woman who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible and was now asking me to literally give her a piece of myself to survive. The woman who, despite everything, was still my mother. "I need time to think," I said. But even as I said it, I knew that time was the one thing we didn't have. Blake's network was closing in, Carmen was dying, and every hour of delay put more lives at risk. The choice was impossible, but it was mine to make. The FBI field office smelled like burned coffee and the kind of desperation that came from chasing criminals who always seemed one step ahead. Ryan led me through a maze of cubicles to a conference room where the walls were covered with photographs, charts, and red string connecting dozens of faces and locations. At the center of it all was a photograph of a man in his 40s with pale eyes and a smile that never reached them. "Vincent Blake," Ryan said, pointing to the photo. "Former medical student at Ohio State, expelled in his 3rd year for falsifying research data and stealing medications from the hospital pharmacy. Since then, he's built one of the most sophisticated organ trafficking networks in the country."
I studied Blake's face, trying to reconcile this ordinary-looking man with the monster who had turned my mother into a criminal and me into a target. How does it work? Agent Lisa Martinez, Ryan's partner, joined us at the evidence board. Blake identifies desperate people, patients who can't get on transplant lists, families facing crushing medical debt, addicts who need money for their next fix. He offers them solutions to their problems in exchange for information or services. "Like selling their children's medical records?" I said. "That's the entry level. Blake starts small, just information gathering, surveillance, building profiles of potential donors. But once someone's in his network, he owns them. They can't back out without consequences." Ryan pulled out a thick file folder. "We've been tracking Blake for 2 years, but he's careful, uses shell companies, encrypted communications, constantly moves his base of operations. But your mother's case gave us our first real break." He spread out a series of surveillance photos showing Carmen entering and leaving various buildings around Cincinnati. After she contacted Blake's network, we started monitoring her movements. She's been meeting with Blake's associates at least twice a week for the past month. "Associates?" Dr. Richard Klein, Martinez said, pointing to another photo on the board. "Lost his medical license in Pennsylvania for performing unnecessary surgeries and falsifying insurance claims. Now he works exclusively for Blake's network, performing transplants in underground facilities." The photo showed a heavyset man with graying hair and the kind of soft hands that spoke of a privileged life. He's the one who would have operated on me? If Blake's plan had worked, yes, Klein specializes in what they call emergency acquisitions, creating medical crises that justify immediate organ harvesting. Ryan's voice was grim. "We think your mother's liver failure crisis last night wasn't entirely natural." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean?" Martinez pulled out a toxicology report. "Your mother had elevated levels of acetaminophen in her system, not enough to be immediately fatal, but enough to accelerate liver damage in someone who was already in failure. Someone gave her a massive dose, probably in the last week. Blake poisoned her?
Blake created urgency, Ryan corrected. Your mother was dying anyway, but he sped up the timeline to force a crisis. The sicker she gets, the more pressure there is on you to make a transplant decision quickly, without time to think through all the implications. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the manipulation. So even her medical emergency was orchestrated? Everything about this situation has been orchestrated, Martinez said. Blake's network researched you for months. They know about your abandonment issues, your relationship with your grandmother, your tendency to put medical ethics above personal feelings. They've been crafting a scenario designed to exploit every one of your psychological pressure points. Ryan sat down across from me. Hannah, there's more. We intercepted communications between Blake and Klein about something called the Harvest Protocol. We think they're planning to take more than just part of your liver. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean? We think they're planning to kill you during the surgery and harvest all your organs. Your heart, kidneys, liver, corneas, everything. With your tissue compatibility and blood type, your organs would be worth over $2 million on the black market. I stared at the evidence board, at the photographs and charts that mapped out the destruction of my life in clinical detail. And Carmen? What happens to her in this scenario? She gets her liver transplant, along with a story about how you died from surgical complications. Blake probably told her that's a risk with any major surgery, that these things sometimes happen despite everyone's best efforts. She'd believe that? Martinez's expression was sympathetic, but honest. Desperate people believe what they need to believe to survive. Your mother has spent 20 years making choices that hurt the people she loves in order to feed her addiction. This is just a different kind of addiction to staying alive. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my life and career. Somewhere out there, Blake and his network were making plans that would end my death and the sale of my body parts to the highest bidders, and my own mother had set it all in motion. What are my options? Ryan joined me at the window. Officially, we're working to gather enough evidence to arrest Blake and shut down his network. But that could take weeks or months, and your mother doesn't have that kind of time. And unofficially, we use you as bait. You agreed to the transplant surgery, but we control every aspect of the procedure. We choose the hospital, the surgical team, the security protocols. Blake's network thinks they're getting what they want, but we're actually setting a trap. The idea terrified me, but it also appealed to the part of me that had spent years learning to solve problems under pressure. What are the risks? Hi, Martinez said bluntly. Blake's people are professionals, and they've had months to plan this operation. Even with our security measures, there are variables we can't control. But it's the only way to stop them? It's the only way to stop them while potentially saving your mother's life, Ryan said. If we wait for a traditional investigation, Carmen dies, and Blake moves on to his next set of victims.
I turned back to the evidence board, studying the faces of Blake's previous victims. Young people, healthy people, people like me who had been targeted for their biological value rather than their human worth. There's something else you need to consider, Martinez said quietly. Your mother may be more involved in this than she's admitted. We found evidence that she's been providing Blake's network with information about other potential donors, people she met in treatment programs, other families dealing with medical crises. The betrayal felt complete now. Carmen hadn't just sold me out. She'd been recruiting other victims for Blake's network. My mother had become a predator, using her own desperation as justification for destroying other families. How many others? At least 6 that we can confirm. 3 of those people have since died under suspicious circumstances that looked like medical accidents, but may have been forced organ harvesting. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what Carmen had become involved in. She wasn't just a desperate mother making a terrible choice. She was an active participant in a network that murdered people for their organs. I'll do it, I said. I'll be the bait. Ryan looked surprised.
Hannah, you need to think about this carefully. The risks to me are smaller than the risks to the next person Blake targets, I said. And this way, at least I have some control over what happens. Martinez nodded approvingly. We'll need several days to set up the operation. Hospital security, surgical teams we can trust, backup plans in case things go wrong. What about Carmen? Does she know about the harvest protocol? We don't think so, Ryan said. Our assessment is that she believes this is just a transplant surgery with normal risks. Blake's network rarely tells their recruits the full scope of their plans. I looked at Blake's photograph one more time, memorizing the face of the man who had turned my family into criminals and my body into a commodity. When we do this, I want to be the one to tell Carmen the truth about what she's been part of. She needs to understand the full cost of her choices. That's your decision, Ryan said. But Hannah, you should know that learning the truth about Blake's network might be more devastating to her than dying from liver failure. Good, I said, and meant it. She should know exactly what her desperation has cost other people for months. She should know that her choice to save herself has been destroying other families for months. As we left the FBI office, I realized that my anger toward Carmen had crystallized into something harder and colder than simple resentment. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd become complicit in the deaths of innocent people. And now she was going to have to live with that knowledge for whatever time my liver donation might give her.
If we all survived Blake's harvest protocol, she would spend the rest of her life knowing that her daughter had risked everything to save a woman who had become a monster. It seemed like appropriate justice. Emily Brooks Carter arrived at Grandma Ruth's house like a force of nature in a designer suit, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors with the authority of someone accustomed to winning arguments for a living. My cousin had driven straight from Chicago after Ruth called her about Carmen's condition, and she brought with her the kind of moral certainty that only came from never having to make an impossible choice. "This is insane, Hannah," Emily said, setting her letter briefcase on Ruth's kitchen table with enough force to rattle the china. "You cannot seriously be considering letting our aunt die because of some misguided sense of justice." "She's not our aunt," I corrected, exhaustion making my voice sharper than I'd intended. "She's my mother, the woman who abandoned me, who stole from this family, who sold information about my organs to criminals. There's a difference." Emily's perfectly styled auburn hair caught the afternoon light as she shook her head. "Family is family regardless of past mistakes. Carmen made poor choices, yes, but she's dying. You have the power to save her life, and you're seriously considering letting her die out of spite?" Ruth sat quietly in her rocking chair, her weathered hands folded in her lap. At 74, she'd seen enough family drama to know when to speak and when to let the younger generation work through their conflicts. But I could see the worry in her eyes, the weight of watching her family tear itself apart. "It's not spite," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if that was entirely true. "Emily, there are things about this situation you don't understand. The FBI investigation, the trafficking network, the other victims." "I understand perfectly." Emily pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like news articles. "I've been researching organ trafficking cases all morning. Do you know what the common thread is? Desperate people making desperate choices. Carmen was facing death, Hannah. Terminal illness makes people do things they never thought they'd be capable of. Like recruiting other victims for the network? Like helping to identify healthy young people who could be targeted for forced organ harvesting." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Carmen didn't just make one bad choice. She's been working with these people for months, helping them destroy other families. Emily's confident expression faltered slightly. "What do you mean, other families?"
Ruth finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "The FBI agent showed us evidence that Carmen provided information about other potential donors, people from her treatment programs, families she met at support groups. At least 3 of those people are dead now. The color drained from Emily's face. That can't be true. I pulled out the FBI file Ryan had given me, spreading the photographs and documents across Ruth's coffee table. Vincent Blake's operation has been targeting healthy young people for 2 years. Carmen became one of his recruiters after she made the initial contact about selling my information. Emily stared at the evidence, her lawyer's mind processing the implications. Hannah, I didn't know it was this extensive. Most people don't, I said. Blake's network is sophisticated. They exploit desperation and family loyalty to turn victims into accomplices. Carmen started as someone trying to save her own life, but she became someone who helped destroy other people's lives. But she's still family, Emily insisted, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Doesn't that count for something? What about the families of Blake's other victims? I asked. What about their right to justice? If I donate my liver to Carmen, if I help her recover, what message does that send about the value of the people she helped to murder? Emily was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs of Blake's victims. Young faces, healthy people who had been targeted for their biological value rather than their human worth. There has to be another way, she said finally. There is, I said. The FBI wants to use me as bait to catch Blake's network. I agree to the surgery, but we control every aspect of the procedure. It's risky, but it's the only way to stop them while potentially saving Carmen's life. Absolutely not. Emily's voice was sharp with fear. Hannah, you could be killed. These people are professionals. What if something goes wrong? Then at least other families won't have to go through what we're going through, I said. Emily, I've spent my entire adult life becoming a doctor because I wanted to save people. This might be the most important surgery I ever participate in, even if I'm not the one holding the scalpel. Ruth stood up slowly, her arthritis making the movement careful and deliberate. Emily, honey, I understand your concern, but Hannah's right about one thing. Carmen made choices that hurt innocent people. If Hannah decides to help her, it needs to be on Hannah's terms, not because family pressure forced her into it. Grandma Ruth, you can't seriously support this. Hannah could die. Hannah could die crossing the street tomorrow, but if she's going to take this risk, it should be because she chooses to, not because we guilt her into it. My phone buzzed with a text message. The caller ID showed Carmen's name. Apparently, someone at the hospital had given her access to a phone. The message was short, but devastating. Please don't let me die alone, like you made me live alone. Emily read the message over my shoulder. She's trying to manipulate you, using guilt about her abandonment to pressure you into donating. I know, but that doesn't make the message untrue. The truth was that I had lived alone, in all the ways that mattered. Carmen's physical absence when I was 8 was devastating, but her emotional absence had started years earlier. I'd learned to tie my shoes, ride a bike, and navigate the complexities of adolescence without a mother's guidance. I'd celebrated achievements and mourned disappointments with only Ruth's steady presence to anchor me. But now Carmen was facing the ultimate aloneness, death. And despite everything she'd done, despite all the ways she'd failed me, the thought of her dying alone felt like a weight I couldn't carry. There's something else, I said, making a decision I wasn't sure I was ready for. If I do this, if I agree to the surgery, I want full disclosure. Carmen needs to know about Blake's other victims, about the Harvest Protocol, about everything she's been part of. She needs to understand the true cost of her choices. Emily looked horrified. Hannah, that information could kill her. The shock, the guilt. Her system might not be able to handle it. Then she dies knowing the truth, instead of dying believing she was just a desperate mother who made one bad choice. I gathered the FBI documents, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was contemplating. That seems fair, Ruth nodded approvingly.
Fair? Emily's voice cracked. There's nothing fair about any of this. Hannah, please think about what you're doing. You're talking about risking your life for a woman who betrayed you just so you can torture her with guilt about things she can't change. I'm talking about justice, I corrected. Real justice. Not the kind that comes from letting her die to punish her, and not the kind that comes from saving her without consequences. If Carmen wants to live, she needs to live with the full weight of what she's done. My phone rang, calling to discuss the final details of the FBI operation. As I answered, I looked at Emily's worried face and Ruth's determined expression, at the evidence of Blake's crimes spread across the coffee table. "I've made my decision," I said into the phone. "Let's set the trap." The conference room at Cincinnati General had never felt more like a courtroom than it did that morning. 12 medical professionals sat around the polished oak table, their faces grave as they debated whether my mother deserved to live. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same institution where Carmen had violated my privacy was now deciding whether she would receive the organ donation that could save her life.
Dr. Elena Vazquez called the meeting to order with the kind of careful formality that meant careers and lives hung in the balance. We're here to discuss an unprecedented case involving potential organ donation between a victim of medical trafficking and the perpetrator who provided information to the trafficking network. I sat at the far end of the table, occupying the strange position of being both the potential donor and a medical professional qualified to participate in the ethics discussion. To my left sat Dr. Richard Klein, whose presence in this room was either completely inappropriate or exactly what the FBI had planned. From a purely medical standpoint, Dr. Patricia Woods, the head of surgery, began, Dr. Brooks is an ideal donor candidate. Young, healthy, excellent liver function, compatible tissue markers. The surgical risks to her are minimal. But the ethical considerations are extraordinary, Dr. James Morrison, the hospital's chief of ethics, interjected. We're being asked to facilitate organ donation from a victim to her victimizer. The power dynamics alone raise serious questions about informed consent. Klein leaned forward, his soft hands folded on the table. If I may, colleagues, I think we're overcomplicating this situation. Medical ethics should focus on medical outcomes. Dr. Brooks is a competent adult who wants to donate. Her mother needs a liver to survive. The past relationship between them, however complicated, shouldn't factor into our decision. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. Dr. Klein, given your background, perhaps you could clarify your interest in this case. Klein's smile was practiced, professional. I've been following developments in living donor liver transplantation. Cases like this, where traditional waiting list protocols don't apply, offer opportunities to expand our understanding of transplant medicine. I felt sick listening to him reduce my family's trauma to a research opportunity, but I forced myself to stay quiet. The FBI had briefed me on Klein's role in Blake's network, and his presence here was part of the larger trap we were setting. Dr. Brooks, Elena addressed me directly, you understand that you have no legal or ethical obligation to donate to your mother, regardless of your biological compatibility. I understand. And you understand the surgical risks, both immediate and long-term. I understand those as well. Dr. Morrison consulted his notes. The committee has reviewed the FBI's evidence regarding Mrs. Rodriguez's involvement in organ trafficking. The scope of her activities goes far beyond a single desperate decision. She actively recruited other victims for the network over a period of several months. Which raises the question, Dr. Sarah Chen from the transplant team added, of whether facilitating her recovery serves the greater good. If she survives this transplant, what's to prevent her from returning to criminal activity? Klein spoke up again. With respect, Dr. Chen, our job is to save lives, not to serve as judge and jury for our patients' past actions. If we start making transplant decisions based on moral worthiness, where do we draw the lines? We draw them at protecting vulnerable patients from exploitation, Elena said firmly. Dr. Klein,
Your suggestion that we ignore the criminal context of this case is troubling. I'm suggesting that we focus on medical realities rather than emotional complications. Dr. Brooks wants to donate. Her mother needs the donation. Everything else is extraneous. I couldn't stick quiet any longer. Dr. Klein, you seem very invested in seeing this surgery proceed quickly. Is there a particular reason for your urgency? Klein's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I believe in the importance of timely medical intervention. Every day we delay increases the risk to both patients. Every day we delay also gives us more time to ensure proper protocols are followed, Elena countered. This isn't a standard transplant case, and it shouldn't be treated as one. Dr. Morrison turned to me. Dr. Brooks, if you proceed with this donation, what safeguards do you want in place? Full disclosure to my mother about the extent of her criminal involvement and its consequences. She needs to understand that other people died because of information she provided. She needs to know about the harvest protocol that Blake's network planned for me. Several committee members looked uncomfortable. Dr. Woods shook her head. That information could cause severe psychological trauma to a patient already in critical condition. The absence of that information would mean she recovers without understanding the true cost of her choices. If she survives the surgery, she needs to live with full knowledge of what she's done. Klein frowned. Dr. Brooks, I'm concerned that your emotional relationship with the patient is affecting your judgment. Perhaps we should consider alternative surgical arrangements that might be less psychologically complicated. What kind of alternative arrangements? Elena asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. I've been in contact with a private facility that specializes in complex transplant cases. They have experience with situations where traditional hospital protocols might be overly restrictive. Klein's smile was practiced, reassuring. They could perform the surgery with complete discretion, away from the complications of institutional oversight. The room went completely silent. Elena stared at Klein with undisguised horror. Dr. Klein, are you seriously suggesting an off-the-books transplant surgery performed outside proper medical supervision?
I'm suggesting a private facility with advanced capabilities and flexible protocols, Klein said, apparently not realizing that he'd just revealed himself as the corrupt surgeon the FBI had warned us about. I looked around the table at the faces of my colleagues, seeing their shock and disgust as they realized what Klein was proposing. These were people who had dedicated their lives to ethical medicine, who had sworn oaths to do no harm, who believed in the principles that separated healing from exploitation. Dr. Klein, I said carefully, this private facility you're suggesting, would it happen to be connected to Vincent Blake's organ trafficking network? Klein's composure finally cracked. His face went pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his briefcase. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I should go. Actually, Elena said, pressing a button under the table, I think you should stay. The conference room doors opened, and Ryan Cross walked in with 2 other FBI agents. Dr. Richard Klein, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, organ trafficking, and violation of federal medical crime statutes. As the agents handcuffed Klein, he looked directly at me with an expression of pure malice. You have no idea what you've done. Blake's network is bigger than you think. This won't stop anything. Maybe not, I said, standing up as they led him away. But it'll stop you. After Klein was removed, the remaining committee members sat in stunned silence. Elena finally spoke, her voice shaky. Well, that was educational. The question remains, Dr. Morrison said, whether to approve the transplant surgery under proper medical supervision. I looked around the table at the faces of people who had become more than colleagues. They had become the family that chose to protect rather than exploit, to heal rather than harm. I want to proceed,
But I want it done here, with this team, with every possible safeguard in place. And I want Carmen to know the truth about everything. Blake's network, Klein's plan, the other victims, all of it. Elena nodded. We'll schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning. Full security protocols, FBI oversight, and complete disclosure to the patient about the circumstances surrounding her case. As the committee dispersed, I realized that we'd crossed a line. Klein's arrest would alert Blake's network that their plan had been compromised, which meant they might accelerate their timeline or abandon Carmen altogether. But it also meant that at least one part of the trafficking network had been dismantled, and Klein would never again be able to exploit desperate families for profit. Now came the hardest part, telling Carmen that the woman who had raised her daughter was about to risk everything to save the life of someone who had helped murder innocent people. The hospital chapel was empty at 3 a.m., a sanctuary of silence in the midst of controlled medical chaos. I'd come here to think, to pray, to somehow find clarity in a situation that defied every moral framework I'd ever learned. Carmen's condition had deteriorated rapidly after Klein's arrest, as if Blake's network had accelerated whatever process they'd been using to manage her decline. Time was running out. Ryan found me in the back pew, his presence both comforting and complicated. Over the past week, he'd become more than just the FBI agent investigating my case. He'd become someone I trusted, someone whose opinion mattered in ways that went beyond professional necessity. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling beside me in the dim light. I keep thinking about a case study from medical school. A surgeon in Nazi Germany who was forced to operate on concentration camp prisoners. He could refuse and let them die, or he could participate in a system that was fundamentally evil, but potentially save individual lives. That's not the same situation, isn't it? Carmen participated in a network that murdered people. If I save her life, am I validating her choices? Am I telling other desperate parents that betraying their children is acceptable as long as they're facing death? Ryan was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Or maybe you're showing that mercy can coexist with justice, that loving someone doesn't mean excusing their actions. Dr. Vasquez appeared in the chapel doorway, her expression grim. "Hannah, we need to talk. Carmen's asking for you." The walk to Carmen's room felt endless. She was awake when I entered, her yellow-tinged eyes tracking my movement with an alertness that belied her critical condition. The monitors showed what I already knew. Her liver function was nearly gone, her body beginning the process of shutting down. "I heard about Dr. Klein's arrest," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The nurses are talking. They think I don't understand what's happening, but I do." I sat down beside her bed, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. "What do you understand, Carmen?" "I understand that the man who promised to help me was planning to kill you. I understand that the information I gave him led to other people's deaths." Tears streamed down her hollow cheeks. "I understand that I became a monster." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." Carmen closed her eyes, her breathing labored. I kept telling myself it was just information, that I wasn't really hurting anyone.
From my support groups, people I'd met in treatment, I kept providing details because I was scared he'd abandon me if I stopped being useful. How many others, Carmen? 6 that I gave him information about. Maybe more. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the people he was asking about were targets or just background research. She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "I know their names, I know their families, and I know that some of them are dead because of what I told Blake." The admission hung between us like a confession at trial. Carmen wasn't just acknowledging her crime, she was accepting full responsibility for its consequences. "The FBI wants me to testify against Blake when they catch him. They said my cooperation could help convict the entire network, but they also said that might not happen if you die before the trial."
Hannah, I need you to understand something. Even if you decide not to donate, even if I die tonight, I don't blame you. You've already given me more than I deserve by being here, by listening to me admit what I've done. I studied my mother's face, seeing both the woman who had abandoned me and the frightened child she must have been when she first turned to drugs to escape her problems. Blake's network is bigger than just Klein. If you survive the surgery, you'll spend years testifying, reliving these crimes, facing the families of the people who died because of information you provided. I know. You'll have to live with the knowledge that your daughter risked her life to save someone who helped murder innocent people. I know that too. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my career in life. Somewhere out there, Blake was planning his next operation, targeting his next set of victims. Klein's arrest had disrupted his network, but it hadn't destroyed it. If I do this, I said, turning back to Carmen, it's not because I forgive you. It's not because I believe you deserve a second chance. It's because I believe in the possibility that someone who's done terrible things can spend the rest of their life trying to make amends. Carmen nodded, understanding the conditions I was setting. And if the surgery goes wrong, if something happens to you, then you'll spend whatever time you have left knowing that your daughter died because of choices you made, and you'll live with that knowledge until Blake's network eventually catches up with you anyway. I understand. I pulled out my phone and called Elena. Schedule the surgery for first thing this morning. Full security protocols, FBI oversight, and I want Carmen's testimony recorded before we begin, in case something goes wrong. After I hung up, Carmen reached for my hand with fingers that felt like paper. Hannah, why are you doing this? I looked at the woman who had given me life and then spent 20 years trying to destroy it, who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible and was now facing death with more honesty than she'd shown in decades. Because 28 years ago, you made a choice to bring me into this world. And despite everything that's happened since then, I'm grateful for that choice. I squeezed her hand gently. This is me returning the favor. But after today, we're even. Carmen's smile was sad but genuine. After today, you'll be the better person between us. You always were. As I left her room to prepare for surgery, I realized that my decision wasn't really about forgiveness or justice or family obligation. It was about the kind of person I wanted to be, someone who could look at a monster and still see the humanity underneath, someone who could extend mercy without excusing evil, someone who could break the cycle of abandonment that had defined our family for generations. In 6 hours, surgeons would remove a portion of my liver and transplant it into Carmen's failing body. If we both survived, she would spend the rest of her life as a witness against Blake's network, helping to ensure that other families never faced the choice I'd been forced to make. And I would spend the rest of my life knowing that when faced with an impossible decision, I'd chosen mercy over vengeance, hope over despair, love over abandonment. It seemed like the right choice for the person I wanted to become.